Hi there, my name is Sonya PauKune and I am a professor of art and design here at Ames Community College. I have an area of concentration of ceramics, so I thought it'd be a good idea to make some instructional DVDs based on the foundations of throwing and on trimming. And there's two basic forms that we throw with. Almost everything is thrown from these two forms. The first one is a cylinder. And for a cylinder shape, we can make a mug or a vase or a spaghetti jar, but every vertical form is based on the cylinder shape. I'll also be doing a bowl throwing demonstration on another DVD. So let's go ahead and get started. We started off by wedging the clay, and we do have a wedging DVD available as well. And when we wedge the clay, our goal is to get it all homogenized. So after I get my nice plastic clay homogenized and I pound it into a ball, I'm ready to throw my cylinder. Most of the cylinders that I encourage my students to throw are about 1.75 pounds to 2.5 pounds of clay, and you're generally at the beginning trying to get a ball of clay about the size of your hand. This one's a little bit bigger than the size of my hand. This is about 1.75 to 2 pounds. So after I get done wedging my clay, I want to attach it to the wheel head, and my wheel is dry at the beginning. So I want to add a little water to the wheel head to attract the clay. Water molecules attract water molecules, so it helps the clay stick on the wheel head. So after I get done getting a little tiny smidgen of water, so I just put a little drop and then I want to rub it out, I'm going to take my ball of clay in my dominant hand, for me it's my right hand, and I'm going to throw it towards the center of the wheel. That's how the term wheel throwing came into play. So I'm going to take it here and I'm going to drop it in there. I'm going to try to line it up to my banding lines on my wheel head. So on the circumference of my wheel head, you'll see all these banding lines. They go from the outside to the inside, telling me if it's on center. So after I get done tossing it there, I want to try to push it into the original set of banding lines closest to the center. Then I'm going to start centering the clay. And my first thing that I want to do after I've wedged it and put it on the wheel is I want to center it on the wheel head from the inside out. So I'm going to show you how that's done. So I'm going to get my hands wet with a little bit of water. I want to make sure that my legs are anchored onto the wheel head, so I'm kind of squeezing it as though it's a horse. And I want to have my chair as close to the wheel as I possibly can. And for me, I'm pretty short, so it's all the way up to the wheel head. I'm only about 5'1". So then I'm going to start by wetting my hands, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press the clay kind of in a cone shape down to the wheel head, and I want to get a nice seal across this edge of the wheel with the clay. Now I know my piece of clay is secured onto the wheel head. Now my next technique is I'm going to start squeezing the clay up, and I'm going to try to keep my hands in a cone shape, and as I'm squeezing the clay up, my fingers are going to overlap until they get really small and it comes all the way off the clay. So I'm going to start down here and start squeezing those hands together. See how my index fingers are overlapping one another and my hands are kind of staying straight up and down until I get all the way to the top. And I've made my cone. Now I want to push this cone down, and I'm going to do a technique called the butterfly. And the butterfly is where I take my less dominant hand, in my particular case it's my left hand, and I put it on first, and I have my right hand on top, and it looks like a butterfly. So over the top of the clay, I've got my left hand on first. The knuckle joint of my thumb is right up here at the top. I'm going to get my right hand wet. I'm going to crisscross over. So again, if I lift them up, it looks like a butterfly. And I'm going to push down and away from myself. First, I'm going to start with both hands. Now I'm going to move my right hand so you guys can see. I'm squeezing my fingertips up towards the heel of my hand as I'm pressing the clay down. As soon as I get to where my pinky starts to rest on the wheel head, I'm going to pivot my wrist down, and I'm going to make an igloo shape. Okay? So that's my first cone up and down. I want to repeat that. So again, hands on the two sides, thumbs crisscrossed over, squeezing them together, overlapping my fingers as I move up to the top, all the way up, getting smaller and smaller as I go. If you look at the bottom, at the end, my little hole where the clay is coming through is very small. So I've got a nicer cone. Now I want to press that cone down, again with the butterfly, left hand on first, right hand crisscrossed over, pushing down with my thumbs, squeezing in with my fingertips towards the heel of my hand as I press the clay downward. When my pinky hits the wheel head, I'm going to pivot my wrist so I get a nice igloo shape. So I go igloo to monolith. Wet my hands again. Start from the bottom, squeezing those hands together, overlapping my fingers as I move my way up to the top and out. Each time you'll see that the cone looks a little bit better and a little bit more in center. So let's press that down one more time with the butterfly. So again, left hand on first, thumb knuckle up over the top of the shoulder, right hand crisscrossed over, pressing down with my thumbs, squeezing my fingertips towards the heel of my hand as I push the clay down. When my pinky hits, I'm going to pivot it till I get a nice igloo shape. So if I look at the clay now, I can see that it kind of looks like it's stationary. So it looks relatively centered. Watch what it looks like when it's not centered. So when it's not centered, you can see that clay moving around, and that means you're not there yet. You might have to cone up and down another 2 or 3 more times to get it into center. I'm going to do what's called final center at this stage. So I'm going to get both my hands wet, left hand on top, right hand over, and I'm squeezing with my fingertips to the heel of my hand as I'm resting my thumbs and pressing down from the top. So as you can see, it again looks like it's stationary. The way I can tell if it's fully in center is I can use my needle tool. So if I take my needle tool and I move it into the clay, as soon as it hits, I want to stop moving it. And I want to look at those lines and see. So you can see the lines are pretty even. Watch what happens if the clay is off center. When I bring it in, the only area that there's a line is from here to here. That's telling me that this part of the clay is closer to my needle tool and it's not in center. So I need to go and do final center again. So again, I'll hold it from the sides with my fingertips, pressing my thumbs down from the top. And then as soon as the clay feels like it's gliding, I peel my hands away, and then I will want to check and see if it's centered. Go back with my needle tool. As long as I'm drawing a nice even line, we're centered. So now we're ready to open it up. So if we look here, I've got some examples of the clay. So the first one I have is a little example of the clay being centered in that first technique of opening up the bottom. So when I first open up, I'm opening up at a 90-degree angle, and I'm creating this little kind of triangular shape or cone shape in the inside. After I get done doing that, then I'm going to take that cone shape and I'm going to pull my middle finger flat parallel to the wheel head as it comes up to the side. So that's what I'm going to do now. So the first thing, I'm going to get a little sponge, and I'm going to put the sponge in my left hand because I'm going to open it with my right hand. I want to get my elbows locked into the inside of my ribs and then on my legs too, and I'm going to put my left hand on the top here, and I'll squeeze a little bit of water so that I can make sure the inside stays nice and moist. So I'm going to start pressing down. I want to keep everything locked in, breathing as I go, and I want to stop when I think I'm about 1/2 inch from the bottom. And I always use this same thing that my grandpa used to say, measure twice, cut once. So before I go too far, I want to measure. So I'm going to use my needle tool to measure the thickness of my base. I'm going to clean off my tool, I'm going to go straight down into the clay, and I'm going to pull it up, and I've got about 1/2 inch, exactly where I want it to be. Now I can open up my flat bottom. Get my sponge wet. Again, the sponge is on my left hand. My right hand, I've got my index and my middle finger stacked on top of each other. Thumb, ring, and pinky are all hooked to the side. So when I opened it, my finger was like this. Now when I flatten the base, my finger is going to turn into a hook. So I'm going to take that hook and I'm going to pull it flat towards my belly button as I move the clay out. Now if you look in the inside, I've got this little ridge and all these little throwing rings. I need to make sure to compress those out of the clay. So I'm going to use my sponge and my fingers on my right hand. So I'm going to take and wet the sponge, squirt out all the water. I'm going to hold the sponge level on the outside with my 3 fingers, and I'm going to press from the center to the outer edge, flattening that out and compressing the clay. Clay is shaped like little disc-shaped molecules, and we want to make sure that they're all flattened out so that we have nice compression on the bottom. So now when we look at the inside, we can see that it's nice and flat and smooth and compressed. So I'm ready to start pulling up on the walls. So that's where I come to this stage. So I've gotten it here, my bottom's nice and flat, and I've got a big thick ridge here for me to start pulling up on the walls. This is what it looks like as I start to make my first pull. So I'm going to have my left hand in the inside, my right hand on the outside, and I want to make sure that I have moisture so that my hands are gliding through the clay. So I'm going to put my index finger on the lip rim and I'm going to squirt a little water. It goes down the outside and the inside. Then my left hand is going to be my anchor or my wall. everything that I'm doing with my pressure is really based on my right hand. So I'm going to hold my left hand steady on the inside. I want my fingers kind of going at a 45-degree angle towards the middle of the vessel. And I'm going to use my knuckle on my right hand, this fatty part of my knuckle, to make my first pull. Right up underneath this little ledge, I'm going to squeeze that knuckle towards my inside hand as I move the clay up and in. Centrifugal force will naturally pull those walls out to make it more like a bowl or a plate. So we have to go against centrifugal force and push the clay towards the inside to keep a vertical form. Now I'm going to do another pull. So add a little bit more water, left hand on the inside, right hand on the outside, take that knuckle, press it in, grab some of that clay, and then move the clay up as I go. I want to make sure that each ring is touching the ring before it. If it starts to look like a spiral, it means a couple things. It's either my hands are moving too fast or my wheel is moving too slow. You get to decide which one it is. It's whichever one you feel more comfortable with. So if you like to move your wheel slowly, your hands have to move slowly. If you like to move your wheel fast, then your hands need to move faster. Okay, so I'm getting a nice cylinder shape, but I've got some little bumps here still, and I want one more pull. So I'm going to go in here, and now I'm going to pull with my index finger. So I'm going to push that clay in, and then I'm going to start pulling it up. All right, about that. And now I'm going to really feel for evenness in my wall thickness. I want my walls to be approximately 1/4 of an inch thick all the way around. Okay. You'll also notice that several times in between each pull, I'll do what's called the A compression. And it's called the A compression because it looks like the letter A. So I'm pushing in on the sides and on the top all at the same time to make sure that it stays nice and level. Let's say, though, I accidentally knock it or hit it and my lip rim is uneven. I can actually trim that off with my needle tool. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So I want to go about 1/4 to 1/16 of an inch under that divot. So I'm going to come under here and I'm going to hold that tool steady. And I'm going to let the wheel push through the clay, and then I'll lift up that uneven part. And then I can compress my lip rim and make it nice and round again if I get it uneven. Now there's a couple other things that you can do to your cylinders to make them a little nicer. I'm going to sop up all the water on the inside. You never want to let water rest on the inside of the piece. It makes that clay wetter than the outside, and it dries uneven, and it can cause a crack. So I want to get that all cleaned up before I finish up my outside edge. This is when our ribs come in handy. So I have several ribs that I like to use in the studio, but this is my favorite rib. It's a metal rib. It's very thin. It is very sharp, so you can cut yourself, so you want to be careful with it. But I'm going to hold this metal rib up against the edge of my cylinder to try to iron out all of my throwing rings. Sometimes artists use throwing rings as a decorative tool. For myself, I don't really like my throwing rings, so I iron them out. So I'm going to start with my left hand on the inside, and I'm going to create a wall, an edge, right here on the edge of the vessel. And I'm going to take my rib and I'm going to press into my index finger on my left hand as I press the clay and iron out all of those throwing rings. Now, depending on what I want to make of this will determine how I shape it. If I wanted a vase, I would start pushing out, squeezing back in, but I'm going to do more of a mug shape. This is actually a beautiful mug. This would hold at least one 16-ounce can of soda. Clay shrinks at about 13 to 16%, so this will make a great size mug. Just a little cleanup on the lip rim. And then normally what I like to do is just a little kind of indentation right up underneath here. Because this is going to be a mug, that would be your lip rest. And I want to give that a nice defined line. So I'll go back in with my tool. This also really is nice for glazing techniques. Now, after I get done inspecting everything and making sure that there's no resting water in the inside, I want to do a little bit of trimming at this stage so I don't have to do a lot of trimming at the trimming stage. So I'm going to use my undercutting tool. For my tool, I have one that's combined with a needle tool and an undercutting tool. Most of them just have the undercutting tool, and then they have more of a compression tool on the edge. So I'm going to take the sharp edge of it, this one, kind of like if it was a steak. I can hold it like a regular pencil. I can hold it like an artist pencil, whichever one I prefer. And then I'm going to try to stay parallel to the side or the profile of the piece as I trim off this extra clay on the bottom. So I want to hold it in that same track as I move it all down until I hear it scraping on the wheel head. Then I'm going to take my needle tool and parallel to the wheel head, I'm going to cut this little bit of clay off. As an artist, you always have to think about your material cost. So even this little bitty hunk of clay that I can just crunch back up and put it into the bag of clay will save me time and money. But also, if I was making this into a mug, this little bit of clay could make the handle for the mug. So I want to make sure to save all of my little chunks of clay into a little pile. After I get done doing that, I'm going to cut this piece off of the wheel head. And we're going to use an undercutting tool or an underwire tool. So that's what this looks like. This is a little bit shorter. You can get some thicker, longer, some made out of fishing plastic wire, some made out of guitar or piano wire. This one's made out of piano wire. I'm going to put a little scoop of water in the front of my cylinder. I'm going to pull this wire tight to the wooden part on my fingers. I'm going to wrap it around like dental floss. And then I'm going to scoop this water up underneath, pressing flat against the wheel head and moving it under the cylinder. If the cylinder starts to move, I want to take that wire and pull it out even because I don't want to undercut a big chunk out of the bottom of my cylinder. Then I'll move it onto the water and then I will set it onto a wear board. For our particular purposes, we're actually going to cut this in half. Normally I would wait to cut it in half until after it's dried a little bit, but for today's demo, we're just going to cut it in half so we can inspect my walls, see how well I did. So I'm going to take my little wire again, pull it taut, wrap it around like dental floss, and then I'm going to slice right through my little cylinder. And I'm going to pull the walls away. Oh, didn't get all the way through. Okay, so let's take a look at it. So if we look, we've got a nice even consistency with the thickness going from here to getting thinner at the top. So when I go to trim it, all I have to do is trim off this extra bit of clay here, so it's nice and even, and over here. And then I'll trim a little bit out of the bottom. My bottom got a little thinner than I wanted it to be, but still thick enough for it to be a cylinder. And so that is the dissection of the cylinder. These particular shapes, the cylinder is a little harder than the bowl because you have to go against centrifugal force. But once you learn how to throw a cylinder and a bowl, you can pretty much make anything in clay. And I encourage you to really hone down these two foundation techniques to get successful in the wheel throwing area. Good throwing, and thanks for watching my demonstration. Have a wonderful day.